So our task today, in the 1 hour we have, is to completely solve God.
God.
All right, up to it.
Okay.
It's one of those things that people have been trying to do in one way or another through the ages of humankind, right? And in many ways we have solved, and in many ways we've caused more problems. And I think we're at a unique place where we get to try to decide how to solve some of the problems of the past. So we talked about that last week, how people designed a certain God. Now we're at the crux of saying, how do we move beyond whatever was framed as God into what will be better for ourselves and for the future? How do we move towards what God needs to be, not just what God has been? So what I want you to do today is kind of share ways that you have moved beyond, ways that you're trying to, and also things that get in the way of. Because we all have those things that continue to stand as obstacles, barriers, and not always barriers directed by somebody else. Very often they're barriers that we keep there because we like something like that. Like Sam and I were just talking about a baby in a manger. Baby in a manger has appeal, like all babies do, right?
Can't see your face. There they can see.
But what do we do so that we hold that baby? And can I say it this way? Do we hold the metaphor that baby holds more than we hold the baby itself? If that makes sense. And going on through the rest of the images that are presented to us, how do we hold on to the power of what they can represent more than saying it had to be a certain way? Because if we get in the other, then we start having arguments about, well, was the baby blue-eyed or brown-eyed, which is nonsensical in the larger picture. How do we hold on to the fact that God births things into the world? And that metaphor. The good news is I don't believe there's right answers and wrong answers today. There's the answers that we're struggling through, the answers that we're trying to understand, the answers that we're trying to share, and maybe most important of all, the answers we're trying to listen to in each other. Because often in a space like this, we batter each other with our right answers, don't we? What we're trying to do is move beyond it has to be a certain way to how do I hold God in that infinite manner that we all know God is, that God is bigger than our definitions, God is bigger than our descriptions, God is much more than any of the limits we put on, and move towards that which is much better. So
better or more acceptable?
No, not acceptable, because it's not going to be acceptable to everyone. And my definition of God and how I view God doesn't have to be accepted by all of you.
That's right.
But what we've done a lot of is rejecting each other in the midst of those views of God. Pushing each other away, fighting for our correct concept.
Well, I don't know about anybody else, but I am struggling now, having reacquainted myself with Spong and some of the things that he says, and looking at him and going, I understand and have mentally assented to the fact that personality God, the God that comes in, isn't real for me. But I'm struggling with what is real. Yeah. What now what am I relating to, or am I relating to anything? Am I, it's like it's almost like I need a name and I don't have it, I'm really, just to say, I'm really excited to get to the part about prayer next week, because I know that is really going to fry my mind, because prayer's been, traditional prayer has
Well, it
been
won't
such
be
an
next
integral part. And so, but just sitting here now with what is God? I mean, how do I relate to this energy? I mean, I'm almost coming up with the lack of another term
Yeah.
for what it is.
Yeah, and that is the crux of the problem. The reason why we've held on to things the way we have held on to them is because we've taken, I think, the simpler routes, the ones that are easiest to hold on to. So, for example, we hold on to Jesus easier than spirit. You know why? Spirit is kind of nebulous, kind of hard to grasp and hold on to. Where Jesus, we can concretize and make into something simple to hold on to. And may I say it in its worst form, control.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's one of the reasons why we do hold on to that, so that we can control not just our own grasp of, but we can control the grasp of those around us. And we say things like this: well, you just have to accept it on faith. You just have to believe.
Yeah.
You have to believe like I do, is what we really mean when we say that. Because true belief is a much different thing. True belief is I believe, not holding on to something firmly, but willingly moving into wherever that belief carries you, which is at least part of what Bishop Spong is trying to get us to do, isn't it? To not just hold on to a concretized anything, but to move and be willing to open up to how God continues to reveal God's self. And listen when how I've understood God is challenged by how you understand God. Right? How is it that you go in a whole different direction than what mine is, but not be threatened by that? Because how many in the past have found yourself threatened, or found someone else around you threatened by beliefs that were not the same as theirs?
Yeah.
And at least part of belief is openness, especially when we're trying to believe the infinite. We have to continually open ourselves up to more. One of the good ways to be able to understand that is think about two of the ways that we explore. We go higher up into the solar system, out into space, and every time we go further, more things are open to us. And we know more about ourselves as we learn more about that. But we do the same as we go deeper and deeper. Just this last month, CERN, which is the collider in Europe, discovered what looks like a way that they're going to be able to see neutrinos, which are so small we've never been able to see them yet. But as we go further and further, we discover more and more what's there, if we allow ourselves to. The hard part is that I learned about subatomic particles back in junior high, and I learned it well and quit learning more because I already learned it.
Yeah.
Right? And so we put a limit on that instead of opening ourselves up to that what I know might be disproven or expanded. But going back to your question, Sam, can we sit in that continually expanding universe and still have peace, certainty, hope? Because at least part of what Dr. Spong worries about is that will leave us without the concrete God that saves us, without the easy answer that gets us past the difficulties. So how are you making that switch? What helps you to be able to get a little further down that road? Because I think, Deborah, what you brought up is exactly what we're all trying to do. Sorry, Judy, go ahead.
You just took our earphones off.
Yep. How about the rest of you?
Okay,
Go ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead. I had that meeting.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Oh, okay. Well, I know for me, my journey started a long time ago because I always ask people, how do it's like for a long time I said I don't even believe in God. And then I started asking people when they said, well, you have to believe in God or this is a God. It's like, well, how do you define your God? I always am interested in how people define God for themselves. And then I started researching how the God that is now recognized as the God came into being. How we adopted this God that is now and how it's evolved over time. And that was very interesting. But now it's like, I think as soon as someone says they know who God is or they define God, then that's when I know they don't know God. If that makes any sense. It's like, to me, it's a journey you're on always. It's a mystery and to me, it's like you were talking about, Jim, with discoveries in science and stuff. I heard a thing recently where there's this physicist who is there was a equation that Einstein was working on at the end of his life on what's the perfect theory of life. And this guy is like, he said, I think I'm getting close to it. And when we solve it, we're going to hear the voice of God. And I thought, wow, now that is pretty incredible. But
That sounds an awful lot like Arthur C. Clarke. Arthur C. Clarke wrote a short story called the 50 million names of God, I think it was, or 500 million names of God. And if you could speak them all, then God would appear. So they were speaking them all, and when they got to the 500 million, everything just dissolved into nothingness.
well, this is a guy who's investigating the string theory and stuff, just
Yeah.
Japanese name. But anyway, he's a current guy. But to me, it's all about, I think God's in each of us.
Yeah.
I think the more I search for God, the more I find it's oh, I can't tell who. Oh, okay. But it's like just trying to wrap your mind around God.
Yeah.
But I just enjoy studying the history of different religions and how they all came about. That's helped me immensely.
Yeah. And I think you're right. It's fascinating because all of them ask questions, but oftentimes ask different questions. And so they come to different conclusions. What they're trying to solve, what they see as the difficulty of life, is very, very different answer for different religions. And so they see a different God.
Well, to me, the God in the Old Testament is pretty awful. I mean, it's like he's very tribal. He's a mass murderer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, he does horrible things.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've never understood that God at all.
Right. But that's one of the reasons, Judy, why evolution happened in religion, both the evolution from Judaism to modern day Christianity, but also from ancient Israel to today's Israel, today's Judaism. Both those have evolved quite a ways beyond.
For me, modern science helps a lot in trying to grasp this concept of God, especially when you get into like some of the more abstract things like string theory and all that. And it's so weird and wonderful. I mean, honestly, my mind doesn't grasp most of what they're talking about, but it's fascinating, and it's beyond what me as a normal person can see. And that's kind of how I'm beginning to view God, is it's beyond more than what I can see, but it is all tied together. And that however God is in this natural world. And I think we're going to find what we used to call supernatural world. It's all the same. It's just world. It's just this place that we are.
Yeah.
And God is interwoven in that. I think what's really hard though is to let go of that personality. I'm really coming to believe that God is not this. If God is no personality, I mean, personage, let me put it that way. If God is no personage, and that's kind of where I'm coming to, then I'm not really sure how interested per se God is in my day-to-day life. Why? Why would that something that infinite and big be even vaguely interested in what's going on this planet down here? Because we are so small, so far out in the left field in the galaxy. I can't imagine a God like that really being all that concerned.
But that's why many of your conservative friends and traditional friends talk about a personal relationship with Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to make it into something that it can grasp and come into, because I understand relationships. And instead, I think Dr. Spong is asking us to go to a God that is personal with every single being across the spectrum. And that's a little hard for us to figure out. How does this God love a rock as much as me?
Yes.
And why? Right? Because that's a different relational space.
Very much so. And for me, at this point in my life, very hard to grasp and to like pull in. And I guess the other way is so easy. I didn't realize how easy it was, to just be in that relationship and just, know who God was and what Jesus was like, and to have it when you really get down and be intelligent. And that's the thing I love about Spong and men who are blazing this path, men and women, is that they're asking you to use that intelligence that was given to you to go look, think, just think.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's difficult about that is when I say my own personal Jesus, like the song goes,
Mm-hmm.
I kind of mean the one that loves me, but not that person I don't like.
Right.
Because I don't want to like Ron, and so God better not like Ron either. You know what I'm saying? And to grasp that love spreads throughout with just as much intensity as what I want to feel it is an interesting thing to try to do. And we don't do it easily or well.
Yeah.
I think I'm still quite agnostic at this point in my search. I'm just delighted with the little that I've read of Spong so far. In his writing, he's so clear and boy, just ticks off all those things which many of us, including me for sure, just find ridiculous and absurd in the traditional way of understanding God. And I appreciate that about him. And then I'm just astonished when I read in like the first chapter of one of these books. I haven't read all, I've read some of each of the three. When he says, I am a passionate believer.
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
a passionate believer in the reality of God, and God is the most important thing in my life. And I think, what? Really?
Yeah.
And I'm very intrigued, and I look forward to reading more.
Yeah.
But at this point, I guess I'm still, probably most of us, in one way or another, are searching.
Yeah.
And so I call myself an agnostic, but the closest I've always come to trying to find some sort of understanding of mine of God is not that God is a personage, as Deborah is saying, but maybe more this force that that's not specifically interested in me or any of us, maybe, but that we can be part of. That we can be part of God. God is in us, but then I'm thinking, maybe
Yeah.
it's
No,
wishful thinking, that we can be part of God, that we can co-create the God force in the universe.
I think, Anne, agnosticism is a faithful position right now, because much of what has been given to us as religion is something we should be doubtful of.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Right? We've been given this that says this is what you have to believe. Many times when people say believe, they say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and if you don't, then
You're not a Christian.
yeah. And in that we sometimes should be agnostic when that's the type of way that it's presented.
Mm.
What he's asking is there a space of belief for us? Is there a space there? And one of the ways that I at least have found at least partially helpful is, I think, one of the ancient ways of speaking of God in Israel was as wind or breath.
Yes.
Mhm.
And I think about that, and I think about the breath that I bring in, that becomes part of me as those particles are diffused by my blood throughout my body and give what I need, right? And then I exhale, sending out the carbon dioxide that goes to the trees, and they breathe it in to be able to use how they need to, and then exhale to me. And I think, is that a good metaphor for God?
Yes.
At least it helps me in some ways,
Sure.
because it literally becomes a piece of me, giving
Mhm.
me what I need, but isn't quite me either,
Right.
right?
The life force,
It's a life force.
that is God.
Yeah.
And that becomes us. God is part of us. And then we emit God into the trees.
Yeah. And so in that way, we are very connected to those trees, and we depend on that life force between us, right?
So how do you answer the request when someone is dying to say, pray for me?
Yeah.
What do? You say, well, I'm going to talk to the trees and you'll feel better.
I always try to meet them where they're at, Sam.
Yeah.
When it comes to things like prayer, I guess it depends on the role that I'm in. If I'm in a pastoral role, I meet them where they're at.
Yeah.
Sure.
And if they say, I believe in the same God that's in the Sistine Chapel, it is touching people, you say, okay, then you have to put that image in your mind, and that's the God you'll pray with for him or her, because that's what, if he says, I believe in God that's either a creator of a woman or a man, that God does not have to be a man, and you say, okay, you have to be a communicator with any kind of God that person has in their mind.
Yeah, but I don't have to necessarily reflect it completely back. For example,
Mhm.
many of my friends pray what I call the just prayer. Do you know the just prayer?
No.
God, I just want to thank you for, and God, I just want to say, and God, I just want to.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't pray that prayer,
No.
but I do try to sit in that space where they have a sense of something of God, and I try to reflect back. And so my
Mhm.
prayers tend to, if I make a request, it's about that we find love. That love is in this space.
Because that's part of it. Almost every conception of God is love
and
is
part of
part
what-
of it. So
That's right.
anybody can relate to that.
That's right. And part of what most of us need in most of our difficulties is a sense of being cared for and in the embrace of
Yeah.
something that loves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't reflect back everything that they say, and I don't think you have to, but you don't also have to, I don't think prayers should be an instructional space.
No.
Go ahead.
Deborah.
Oh,
Right.
no, I was just doing a high five, amen. Yes, prayer is not.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Sorry.
We do a lot of preaching in prayers though, don't we? Or I
Yeah.
shouldn't say we do, a lot of people do.
Mm,
And that's rarely as helpful as what they think it is.
mhm.
I had an interesting surprise happen to me yesterday. It was yesterday the 1st of December. Yes, it was.
Yesterday was the first.
I went to, yesterday was, what's today, Wednesday?
Wednesday? No, Thursday.
Thursday, yeah.
Today's Thursday. Monday. Ah, it must have been. I went to UMC hospital for a friend of mine who is in ICU. He's been there for 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 weeks.
Mhm.
And he's had a triple bypass. He's had surgery on his kidney. He's had a collapsed left lung.
Mm.
And when I came in, and they only allow his relative, his son, and one other guest can come in, visitor. That's all for the whole day. You can come and go, but you can't change partners. You have to go for that day. Okay, so I made a reservation to go in and see him, and I don't drive alone. Phyllis usually goes with me. She's the navigator. She does the important things, like when I pass the street, she says, "Bye-bye, street." So anyway, I went in to this place, and here was my good friend who I have spent many years with. He's a doctor, has delivered many, many, many children. He was one of the top general practitioners in Tucson. He and his partner's clinic that they had. Anyway, I walked in, and this guy's eyes were closed. He was out of everything, and I grabbed onto his hand, and he had a tracheotomy. He couldn't talk anything, but he squeezed my thumb. And I said, "That's yes, isn't it?" And he squeezed it again. So I spent 2 hours with him, and he had all kinds of interruptions from people, from medical persons that, I'm sorry, they were just not attuned to the patient. They were, the lack of sensitivity just floored me. I asked one person there, there was a psychiatrist that came in along with a nurse and a neurologist, and I don't know whether some of them were students. The psychiatrist said, he has been an official psychiatrist for a year and a half. Well, whoopie-doo, you know, he looked like he was 18 years old. I don't know what. Anyway, they're standing there and they can't even pronounce the guy's name. It's on the wall. He called him a Mr. instead of Doctor. And then he started reading off this card. Have you got all of your insurance in turn? Are you prepared to financially and all of that? Nothing at all that was personal, really. You know, it was like he's wanting him to admit to a do not resuscitate, you know, stuff. And this whole time, I'm watching my friend who is listening to this, and I know that he's uncomfortable. He don't like it. And I said, finally, to the psychiatrist, I said, would you be this way if this were your father in bed in the same situation? Would you treat him the same way? And the guy just got quiet.
Yeah.
And the neurologist woman that was there, again, I don't know what she was very quiet. The nurse was quiet. And his son, who was there, was over each day. He's been going in for each time. Lives up in the White Mountains, but he's down here with him. And his son almost applauded. He raised his hands up, and the psychiatrist said, well, I think we're finished here. And he walked out.
What you're talking about, Sam, is that it's easy in human interactions to become transactional. And it's not just in the medical profession. It's easy to just become transactional in wherever, where we just deal with each other. And I think we've done that in our theology as well.
Well,
We
here's
figured
the
out
ending.
the transactions of how God reacts.
Here's an ending. I got a call this morning from his daughter who came down. I know the family very well. And Leanne called me and she said, you have got to see this picture of Dad today. And here was a guy who still had the tubes in him, who still had everything connected. He had on a baseball cap and he was smiling.
Yeah.
And she said, Dad just had a change. He's doing so well. Thank you so much for what you did. I didn't do a damn thing.
Yeah.
I
Well, no,
didn't
but
pray
you
for
did.
him.
Because you brought humanity into that space. You brought relationship into that space. And at least part of my definition of God, Sam, is that God is relational, not in the way we often are relational,
Yeah.
but in the way that I relate to a rock and I relate to a tree, and the things are more than just, they can be just something I pick up and throw, or they can be something I look at and think about and connect to.
Yeah. Well, anyway, they've now made arrangements that you can bring 2 visitors in instead of 1.
Good.
And I've applied for next week. I said, I'll come back.
Good. Good.
Good to talk to you about that.
No, I'm glad you did. Thank you. So what we're trying to figure out is how to, like in that situation, I think that Sam was God, not the whole of God, but was presence of God in that space somehow, right?
Mhm.
But that goes outside of some of the definitions of how people see God, use God, right? And those definitions we give are what really get in our way. Like I have friends of mine that have taught themselves that the world has to deteriorate so that God can come in and save everything.
Yeah.
But what's that say about God? That God's not going to be present in every moment. And that kind of goes against my sense of what God's there. Now, we can easily make the world deteriorate with or without God. But what I'm saying is that for me, the flow of human history is that it's been a continual up flow. Not that it hasn't gone like this, but it's continually, we've gone to greater and greater development, better and better structure. We've progressed and evolved. But I think some of my friends think it has to devolve so that then God can come in the great Armageddon, defeat the evil of the world. That makes no sense to me. But if you have that in
Command the
your
sun to
mind,
stand still.
what?
He can command the sun to stand still, and
Yeah.
there you go.
But if you have that in your mind, you treat the world very differently. And I
Yeah.
believe that's part of where we're at politics-wise, is that people are saying, let's make the world deteriorate so that Christ will come back faster.
That is a truth. I mean, the way that I look at, and for those of you who don't know, I've come out of a fundamentalist background, so that's probably why part of this is so hard for me. The way that so many of us used to treat the earth was literally, we were called to dominate, not to serve. So then when you try to put this juxtaposition of the idea of the servant, of the believer as, ministry into mankind, you get lost, because it's like, no, my job is to reign, and then Jesus will come in and fix this big mess that we've made of our earth, and we'll go on from there and start all over, and it'll all be great and grand.
Yeah.
Keeping
And
the
then you
same
can
dumb
say,
had in the
then you
beginning,
can say, thank
you
you,
know,
Jesus.
earth all along.
Not of this world.
Yeah.
What all the people, and when I was with evangelicals, that was their thing. We're not of this world.
This world, right?
We're
Right.
of the next world.
Sure. But in saying that, then what you say also is that God is not present. From my background, Mormonism, I told you some about what happens with that, right? That Joseph Smith was visited by God and Jesus Christ in body form. But what I didn't tell you, I don't think, is that what they said essentially to Joseph Smith is that, well, shortly after Jesus came along, and the disciples were trying to bring people and follow, but they kind of just fell away. And so for about 1,500 years, God hasn't been present on the earth.
No.
Now, what's that say about God? And there's a lot of those types of conceptions that say that I'm going to come back and I'm going to be what I should have been. I don't quite believe that. And many of our less than perfect theologies have something to do with that. Well, God loves me, but not you. God loves in this way, but not in that way.
Yep.
God loves humans more than nature. And somehow I think that we have to be open to larger and larger images than that. So that it can't just be a Christian God, can't just, or a Christian against a Muslim God. But there has to be something more about that infinite than that.
And then how do we bridge that? I think that that's going to be a key piece too. How do I make myself open and available to my Muslim sisters? How and relate to them, and how do they evolve in their thinking so that God is more than Allah.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, that's for them to work out. But I mean, then I start thinking though about bridge building and how do we all connect?
Mm-hmm.
Because for me, I feel like that the idea is to get to unity and to oneness. And I think we've got ways to go.
Yeah, we have a long ways to go. Usually because when we say oneness, we're trying to say everyone start believing like me.
Right.
And that's not really oneness. Is it? Stephen Prothero wrote an amazing book that everyone should read. And I think it's called God is Not One. And what it does is it goes through all the major religions in the world and they say, what is the basic problem that they see? And so then how do they formulate God according to that problem? So for Muslims, the problem is disobedience. So their solution is submission, submit to Allah, right? And that's a very different thing than the Christian God, that's more formulated on sin. What have you done wrong? And so it's that you need to repent. Repentance is a very different action than submission. And if you go to the other major world religions, he gives a formulation like that for each one. So one of the good questions we can be in with each person is to kind of say, what is it that you think is wrong with? And how do they perceive God helping in that space? Now, you don't have to believe necessarily, but I think it helps to be able to know that there's a whole lot of different ways of being able to perceive what God is helping with. Right? If your struggle in the moment is one of mourning, you need a whole different God. You need more of a comforting or a presence God than if you're in a place of conflict. Right?
Yeah.
And can we hold that God can be part of each of those conceptions without making God just one of them?
Yeah, all of them at the same time.
Yeah.
What do some of the rest of you think about conceptions of God or your thoughts about God? I'd be interested to hear.
Jim, I have a question. It kind of goes along with that. Where you mentioned the Muslim religion, their requirement or belief that they have to submit to God. Does that mean that they see God as an external source, an external power, as
Absolutely.
opposed to
God is
they
wholly external to humanity.
So they have no concept of an internal.
Well,
relationship with
I don't want
God?
to say no concept. I'm sure they're struggling in some of the very same ways as what we are. But classic Islam is that man is full of willfulness and so needs to learn submission.
Okay, thank you.
And of course, some forms of Islam that are very punitive and brutal involve punishment for not submitting.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ron.
Okay, so I'm just going to use a metaphor, and maybe not many people would get it unless you've been traveling in other ways. And that is, as a bicycle tourist, the end of every day, you come to a campground or motel, and there's other bicyclists, and we're all on the same route, or sometimes we're on different routes, but we come and share. And that sharing doesn't have any goal other than just to share, just to be with that person.
Yeah.
And, I think in a spirituality, being able to share, and it's hard because the minute we get into something like church, we're used to wanting to push our opinion. But
Yeah.
just to be able to sit and share.
Yeah.
And I guess the other thing for me is that, I walked away from First Baptist Church in Whittier 46 and a half years ago. But, still within me is a deep sense of shame, because you've heard all those sermons about how no matter what you do, it's not good enough. And it's just a constant recognizing that, letting go of it. And then being willing, and for me, I guess the broader question that I have over this whole series is, in some traditions, death is part of life, and in the Christian, at least in what I was raised, was that death is a punishment. So any type of suffering is punishment by the divine, and how to be part of the Christian story without getting caught up in the mess
Yeah.
of that belief system, which works against, I guess, the compassion, the togetherness of fellow pilgrims on a journey.
Thank you, Ron. I think that's a remarkable way to do things. And what we would do in religion at those little way stations is like everyone has to make 100 miles or 200 miles or whatever it is. And that's not how that works, is it? Some people are going 50 miles a day. Some people are going the opposite direction, right? So getting negative mileage compared to what I think the journey is. And yet that's what we do.
Hey, Ron, has anything in your 46 years since you left Whittier helped you to shed any of that feeling of?
Yes, and actually, I've been a librarian for 25 years. I'm just retired, but it's hearing the stories of other people, because when you go through that experience, you feel totally alone.
Yes. Yep.
And when you hear that there are other people along the way that have gone through similar situations, it really helps.
Yeah.
And well, and then Carlene, the last one I read was Carlene Cross. She wrote a book called Fleeing Fundamentalism. And it was just, I would recommend it for somebody who's been through that experience.
Yeah. Carlene Cross, did you say? Yeah.
Bishop Spong tells the story of going to a class. I think it's in the book New Christianity. Going to a class and teaching them and essentially asking them, when you think of God, what's a word that you pin to that image? And they start off saying things like energy, and it was a very evolved class, and so they were saying some really good things, and then they went back to some of the more traditional things. But then they started getting into some of those things that have often been given to God, things like demanding, angry, busy, right? And he kind of pushed them on that. So why do you put those words there? And one lady wonderfully stood up and said, it's not that we're saying that's God, but it is the way that people act for God. People sit with God. People relate to God. And so when we say some of the things about God, what we're not saying is God's own self, but the communal nature of God's presence among us. How are we God for each other? And very often we present that shame-filled God that you experienced, Ron, for whatever reason that they found that important. They gave that to you. How do we sit in a space that's better than just that? What are the things we really want to pass on? Because there's times when, love, for example, is multifaceted. And as a parent, what you think of as love, your child's not kind of receiving it that way. Right? And how do we still bear out the best of what we think God is, even though sometimes the other person doesn't see it the same way? I don't know. Is there a vengeful side of God? Not from my perspective, but some people see him that way.
Does anybody see him as a her?
I do.
Good.
As a what?
As soon as you put a gender on though, you're personifying God. Whether
Yeah,
it's
that's
male,
right.
female, or anything, you're still personifying God.
So what's better if you say, does anybody see our creator?
Although the way that sometimes the gender-based pronouns are good is, for example, one of the images in the New Testament about God is that of a mother caring for a baby. That's a good image of God, not the image you want to have all the time, but a good image for God. If you've had a good father, a father image can be a good image of God. It's that not all of us have good images of all of those, and not always are those images appropriate in all cases. And so when we try to take God and turn God into only one image, that has to be a forever type of image, I think we lose something there.
Yeah. This last November was the national recognition for Native Americans. And so I made it a practice for that month that in my newsletter, I would always put in a prayer, Apache prayer or a Hopi prayer or some Native American prayer. And so often they spoke of the Great Spirit. They did not say the Great Male Spirit
Right.
or the Great Female Spirit. So that means Mother God, the mother of our trees, nature, the spirit of the wind. That's all.
And it's very typical, Sam, in more ancient religions to have both a very strong mother figure and a very strong father figure, like Mother Earth, Father Sky type of, so that the two are held in tension as the divine.
Well, I like that. I always felt more comfortable.
Yeah, yeah.
This is a good program.
So
Preacher.
Dr. Spong says three things that are his basic ways of viewing God. And I don't think he's completely holding these up as this will be the right answer for all eternity, but he's saying, I think he thinks this is a good place for us to start. That God is life, God is love, and God is ground of being. And I like that, in that all of us need life, and all of us experience that life in a whole lot of different ways, don't we? And so it's a huge set of things to draw from to define how it is that God is life for me and for you. And in the conversation, we can do a whole lot of stuff. We can just draw each other down wonderful paths in that conversation. Same thing with love. How we've been loved and how we've failed to have love or failed to be loved is very instructive for us as we try to figure out what God can be and what God might be drawing us towards. But then that other sense of, not that God is a being, but it's the ground that allows being to happen. Right? I think that's a really good thing to do, because we're all trying to figure out how to be, what to be, and that God is that which allows that being to move forward.
As I was reading some of Dr. Spong's things, I was thinking, and a lot of it's very Kabbalah, very, very Kabbalistic. Especially when you get into the ground. And I know one of the things he said that kind of struck me was in Philippians, Paul portrays Jesus as the life in whom the divine one has emptied the divine nature. And I was sitting there looking at that and I was thinking, well, then what's the difference between that and the Kabbalistic idea of the divine pulling away, creating a void?
Because the one's Christian and biblical and the other isn't. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
And on that happy note,
But that is what we do a lot, isn't it? Is we, instead of drawing connections between, we fight for our side. I like one of the lines that he said here, that in this space of exile, everything's on the table.
Mm.
And are we willing to allow that to be there and to encourage each other to tell us their truths? Not in a way where we automatically start putting up the barriers and start fighting with each other, but in a way that allows us to open up. I think we do a lot too easily of confining truth in small packages and saying this is all it is. And I think at least part of what Bishop Spong is trying to help us to do is open our hands, right? To unclasp ourselves from that. But that also takes us not going into conversations with each other with a preconception of what that other has to be. Can we listen and be enlarged by them instead of fight for whatever our concept is? It's a hard thing, huh?
Yes. And I don't even feel like I have a concept.
Well, but part of the way that you'll get closer to a concept is by hearing other people's things. If you allow that to nurture whatever it is that you've already figured out, and you know, it's almost like the little cootie things where you have to stick on a leg here and an antenna there, right? And you have to kind of build what it is that's going on. We don't get it all figured out at first.
Whenever I have heard or read the term the ground of our being,
Uh-huh.
I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. The ground, what is the ground of our being? So I think, is that the same as creator? No. Is that, what is that? What do you all think? What is the ground of our being? Can you say it in a different way? Can the others of you say it in a different way? What do you think it is?
I guess I've never really heard that a whole lot. To me, I don't know, maybe the ground of our being is our consciousness. And what is consciousness?
Mm. Mhm.
in the movie Avatar, they had a term. The person would look at they would say, I see you.
Yeah.
And that just covered a multitude of things. I see you. You know, that's not bad. That's pretty close to, I see the light of God in you.
Mm.
Okay. You don't have to define what it is that you see. I see you. I'm with you. I'm understanding you. Or I'm feeling with you. I don't know. But I like that phrase, I see you.
Yeah,
Well,
I like.
and I think in some ways that does describe ground of being. What is it that underlies reality, right? Do I see more than just the glasses on your face or the shirt that you're wearing? Do I choose to see beyond just that?
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
think that's part of what it means for me.
Mhm.
Anyone else?
I come from an electrician's home. So when I hear ground of my being, I literally think of the grounding that happens that allows the energy to flow through me without getting fried.
Yes,
Interesting.
right.
Interesting way of looking at it.
That's a good
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, the tough part about this is that it sounds like we haven't quite figured God out perfectly yet.
Not yet.
Shoot.
Which is a good thing.
I have to tell you, I feel wonderful about this discussion. I feel, thank you for what you've shared and how you've moved my conception of God I hope it's been the same for you.
Mhm.
What's for next week?
Next week, we begin to talk about Jesus the Christ.
Mhm.
I'm going to be reading. Oh, where did I put it? I've got a book that I'm reading where he is dealing specifically with, oh, I put it in here. Sorry. I'm going to be reading Jesus for the non-religious. I'll probably read a couple of the chapters in the Unbelievable book, because that's where he, formulates his stuff most readily. But I'm kind of reading this because he's trying to say, what if we approach Jesus in a way that is beyond all the stuff that we've added to it for 2,000 years?
Yeah.
That's what he's trying to get back to, that original Jesus. So that's kind of what I'm going to do. The good news is that if you look on the sheet of paper I gave you with all the books to read, there are like 6 full books. So there are plenty of things to read about what he thinks Jesus is. All right. Thank you for your time today.
Oh, thank you for hosting this.
It's
Yeah,
Thank you.
my
thank
pleasure.
you.
Thanks,
So much.
everybody.
Take care, my
Bye,
friends.
everyone.
Everybody have a good
Next
week.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.